Hey everyone, welcome again to the Darshan Talks podcast. I am your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on, and our guest today is going to be helping us with that. As you know, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA-regulated products. So if you think about drugs, wonder about medical devices, consider cannabis, or obsess over pharmacy, this is the podcast for you. I do these video podcasts because they're a lot of fun and because I find myself learning something new each time. Today is going to be no exception. But it's always nice to know when someone's listening. So if you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please subscribe. If you want to find me, please reach out to me on Twitter at Darshan Talks, or just go to our website at darshantalks.com. Our guest today, we've had him before, actually relatively recently, but he's just such a fascinating guest. So we were excited to bring him back, and you guys wanted to talk to him as well. So we're excited to have him again. Our guest for today is the SVP of Regulatory Affairs, Quality, and Operational Excellence at Syros, Ashley Preston. Hey, Ashley, how are you?
Hello, Darshan. It's a pleasure to be back. Thank you.
Pleasure to have you. So let's talk a little bit about what you've been up to since the last time we spoke. You spoke. What have you been doing at Syros the last few weeks or so?
So the last few weeks, I've been really looking at planning out the operational excellence activities for Syros. It's a relatively new function that we've opened up only as of the end of February this year. And so I took that on in addition to the other responsibilities that I have, because there's some synergy with how we operate. And I also have kind of an interest myself in operational excellence and process, and making sure that companies can scale in a meaningful way as they move through, from an early biotech stage, and grow through to being fully fledged commercial biopharmas.
So let's start with the beginning, which is the term operational excellence. How is that different from, say, what a COO would be doing, which would be operational as well? Or is it the same thing?
It can be the same thing, yeah. So depending on where you sit within the organization. So right now, my responsibility for operational excellence really centers on the clinical development space for Syros. The principles are equally applicable across the organization. Really, the impetus for doing this was the need to be able to grow the organization and scale as we move. So Syros, as you know, was formed in 2013, and now we are over 100 staff. And so I find that that critical mass for a biotech company is where you reach the 100 mark, 100 to 200 people in the organization. You start to see teams of teams operating. So no longer do you have the same people going to every meeting, involved in every decision. So you have coaches and players rather than the player coach model, which is great, and it exemplifies that the organization is growing and is successful. But it's also important then that the teams are empowered and enabled, and they have a clear understanding of their role and responsibility. And whilst if you think about all the activities that a company conducts, some of those are governed by GXP, and so there's very clear laws and regulations that cover them, and you have a quality management system to administer them. But all the other things that you do within an organization are still critical, even if they're not under that GXP banner. So, for instance, how you decide your clinical development plan. FDA is not concerned with how you internally decide what to develop and when. They're concerned with when you do develop it, you do it according to the laws and regulations. But that investment is huge for a company into what are we going to develop and how are we going to develop it. And so having a robust governance framework and a process for creation and review of those clinical development plans is critical for the success of the organization, even if it's not a GXP governed activity. And so when the organization is small, that's easy enough, and the ideas kind of float around, and you can sort of manage it ad hoc. But as you double or triple the size of your organization, it becomes, people start scratching their heads. Oh, I'm new to this company. How do we do this? How do we decide on this? Who has to be involved? Who has to approve, and so on? So it makes sense to have some level of structure. It doesn't have to be formal SOPs, but some level of structure that gives some consistency and robustness to how you operate, and gives people the confidence of what they're responsible for and what they need to do when they come into the organization. And it's really the only way to grow sustainably. Otherwise, it can become a bit of a mess.
I've been part of organizations where that did not occur. So no, 100% it can be a mess. So which really raises that question, right? So the one thing that sort of stood out to me as you were describing this, you said this is a new role for you in the last 6 months or so, and when the first two parts of your title is quality and regulatory, both of which really scream, based on my own experience of doing it, screen control. What you really want is you have processes in place and making sure that they work cohesively to build work cohesively with existing structure so that you have a clean sort of process built out. On the other hand, one of the key things you mentioned about operational excellence is growth and scale. So to me, and obviously there's still control in that, and that's part of the whole play. But it sounds like if you're building a rocket ship, the first two are about solidifying the structure, while the last one's about putting more jet fuel in there. How is that, first of all, an appropriate characterization of what operational excellence is, or am I still not fully understanding where you're going with it?
So, I mean, I see your point. I think there's a lot of synergy between the functions, in the sense that you can have operational excellence in your quality management system. In fact, you should. Well, you should be at its core. I think it was really originated by Dr. Shingo, a Japanese industrial engineer who worked with the Toyota company. And Toyota's manufacturing process is famous worldwide for its capabilities, its precision, and the Kaizen concept of continuous improvement, which is really what it is. And so when Dr. Shingo published his thoughts on operational excellence, this became the Shingo model, and it centers around the principle of that culture should be at the center of what you do. So employees should be empowered and enabled to review what they're doing and to provide suggestions for continuous improvement. But then from the top down, leadership needs to encourage that environment, and then a set of guiding principles that he established around how to implement that. So that can be applied across an organization in total, across all the different functions. So I see your point. It's really about having an open mind to improvement, not change for the sake of change, but change for the sake of improvement and change for the better. And it's really about making the process that you apply to any given task appropriate for the importance and the level of rigor for that task. So as we say, GXP processes have far more rigid structure to them. GMP manufacturing is very clearly and rightly so. It's heavily controlled. But again, there are other things that you do in an organization that needs some level of understanding and some level of governance, but not that same rigor. So it's a balance as well, and I think that's where operational excellence helps you to balance out the needs as you grow the organization, and that can change. You add more functions, you need more structure, and so on. But you don't want to overburden the organization, because that will bog it down in bureaucracy.
What I'm also hearing you say is, and again, feel free to correct everything I'm saying, by the way. But what I'm also hearing you say is, obviously there's the role for a COO, which is really managing the day-to-day affairs. But what operational excellence is almost doing is creating a framework or preparing the ground for something, department by department by department, so that once it gets to a point where the CEO is managing things, he or she is not walking into chaos, but an organized structure that they can help manage from there on. Is that fair, or did I misunderstand what you said?
No, absolutely. It's really operational excellence as a philosophy and a culture. You can build that into culture the same way as we look for a quality compliance culture as well. So those two things come together. I really believe that. So you're thinking about a culture in the workplace where problem solving and teamwork and leadership come together to be constantly improving and putting the right structures in place. So the COO needs to do that for the whole organization, absolutely. And in a large organization, you would have that applied in different divisions or different functions as well.
So you said that you're starting to do this in the clinical development space. Could you talk a little bit about the considerations you had or you have as you're developing this out? Like, what are you thinking about? One of the key pieces you mentioned is what will you develop and when? how do you put structure around that? Like, it's one of those questions that every pharma and biotech company is going, I have 4, 5, 15 products. Who do I give weight to, and which ones are my dogs that I can get rid of? So, so how do you figure that out? What do you work?
Yeah. So, excuse me. Operational excellence really is the framework by which you make those type of decisions and considerations. So, not necessarily specifically, on the topic itself, on the program itself. That would be, that's a decision for the team. But the team needs to have a framework in which they can operate. And so, we have a process. Okay, well, how do we create the clinical development plan? Who reviews it? Who's responsible, accountable, and the typical RACI matrix. And then what's the governance? At which level is the team? Which level of team is making the decision? And then how does that go to management or the C-suite or the board, depending on the size of the investment or otherwise? So all of those parameters is what operational excellence puts into place, so that we can do it in a robust and repeatable way and an efficient way. Another element that is important and a really big topic of sort of academic research as well as implementation practically is decision quality. So, companies are now thinking heavily about really truly injecting decision quality into their decision making. And that came out of work from Stanford from a gentleman named Carl Spetzler, who also originated an organization called Strategic Decision Associates, I believe is the name of the company. And he was sort of a key academic, and is a key academic still in that space. And it really behooves companies to think critically about their decision making, because these are big bets. These are, drug development costs a lot of money, and so you really want to make sure that you are eliminating as much as possible any potential biases in your decision making. And decision quality affords you the tools to actually make sure that you are making really the right decision. And people, when you think about a decision, people sitting around a table as a team have their own collective experience, and you think, okay, well, we've got 30 years experience in this room, we should be able to make the right decision. But those people can make the right decision, but you also have to recognize they carry with them the bias of their previous decision making, the bias of their previous experience. And so decision quality really helps you to tease apart those biases and really put in place a framework that's directs you towards the correct decision for your particular scenario and your situation.
So two parts really jumped out at me from that conversation. The first thing that jumped out at me before we get into decision quality is the idea of operational excellence. On one hand, I 100% stand behind and agree with everything you described, which is you need to put a structure in place so that governance is simpler. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, isn't this the beginning of bureaucracy? And isn't this what people would sort of go, I jumped into a startup and I'm now reporting to people, and the person I could just pick up the phone and talk to 2 weeks ago is now someone I have to reach through like 4 lines of, that is now 4 people away from me. So mm-hmm. How do you battle that pushback? Because I imagine employees that culture change will start affecting them, and employee satisfaction becomes affected. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. And that's where it's a balancing act, because you need to have a certain level of structure as you grow an organization, but you don't want it to be so overbearing that it is counterproductive for people, and both functionally and psychologically. And that's absolutely important. And as someone who's worked in quality and in regulatory affairs for a number of years, nobody loves SOPs, probably because they've been in an environment where everything is done because the SOP said so, and that's not the philosophy you should take anyway. The SOP should record what you do, not the opposite. But in any organization, if you are 4 people sitting around a table and you've got your molecule and you are the 4 function heads responsible for all of the work around that molecule, you know what's happening directly, and you know what's happening day to day on the product, and you can guide that product through development. But once you scale the organization to where your team is now representing your function or functions on multiple programs, that is there's just not enough hours in the day to have that level of high touch. So you need to have a structure in place whereby those people on the team understand fully their role and responsibility within the organization. And that can come in a small environment just through sort of discussions, ad hoc discussions, and an understanding between people. But when you, as I say, when you double, triple the organization or more, it just can't happen. And so it needs to be at least written somewhere. It could be very simple. It can be a set of slides that says, this is how we do this. It goes from A to B to C to D. But that slide set gives consistency for any new person coming into the organization is trained in that way. And they also then on the flip side, and this is operational excellence as well, they have the opportunity in a structured way to input and say, well, I think we could do this differently. What if we went from A to C and then back to B because of X, Y, and Z reasons? So there's that opportunity, which doesn't quite happen as readily when it's not written down anywhere. It's sort of a little bit ad hoc. But yeah, you're right. You have to scale it commensurate with the size of the organization. Otherwise, you're overburdened with bureaucracy, and people, turn away from that.
So how do you give that voice to employees to know that they're being asked for the input as opposed to being told what to do?
So this is where it's central to the idea of operational excellence. Culture sits at the middle of the diamond, if you like. So culture, results, process, tools, and systems. And so culture at the middle has to be driven from the top down as well, from management all the way down. That a culture of openness, a culture of transparency, a culture of engagement, and you need to tell people, this is what we're trying to achieve. You have to clearly articulate that vision for operational excellence. We are trying to achieve better for our organization as we grow, and we need your help because nothing happens without the people in the organization at the end of the day.
So what you're talking about is clear lines of communication, which was a lot easier to do in what people are now referring to as the before times. Before COVID. How is that happening now for you? Like, are you doing like all hands Zoom meetings and saying this is what operational excellence looks like for us now? We welcome your input. Or are you doing this more? Let me send you the slides and just call me if you have questions. Or how do you bring people on the same page when you're doing such a fundamental structural reframing, if you will?
Yeah, so it's definitely got to be, a combination approach. So there is the slide deck approach, and the sort of the rollout of ideas, but you also have to engage with the individual stakeholders themselves or the function heads and make sure that there's buy-in, make sure they understand the value of what you're trying to achieve, because as soon as they can see some value in what you're trying to do, they're bought in, and the wheels are turning, and it's a much smoother ride than if there's initial resistance. And of course, everybody in any change, everybody sits on a different place on the change curve. And it's really, number one is the communication of that, understanding, communication and empathy for people and their position on the change curve that allows them to shift through that curve and come along for the journey. So what we're doing right now is, in the last few months, we've been really in the preparation stage, the mapping stage, if you like, mapping out, what does the current state look like? How do we make decisions right now in the organization? And then using that, we can then stress test and pick apart some of the ideas and say, well, does that really have to be made there? Can it be made somewhere else? Can the team make this decision and make a recommendation? Does everything need to go to the management team? And I can tell you the answer is no, because they have the same number of hours in the day as everybody else. And that's the whole point. I think it's was General McChrystal, famously has written a whole book about the teams of teams and empowering teams to do their best work. And that philosophy really rings true in any industry, but in the biopharm industry, where almost everything we do now is a cross-functional matrix system. So those teams of teams need to be empowered to do their best work.
So this is amazing, because I'm thinking through a lot of the clients I've had and the conversations we've had, and one of the comments you said earlier, I wonder if it's the difference between legal and regulatory when you said that, and I figure out why you're saying it. I totally understand why you're saying it. It's just kind of an interesting comment where you said the point of an SOP is to record what you already do, and that seems so intuitive and obvious. From a legal perspective, I'm kind of going, the point of an SOP is to tell you what to do so that you stay within those rules, so that if anyone comes back and challenges you, you go, this is what I followed. So we're both saying the same thing from two different perspectives,
Yes.
but it's such an interesting perspective difference. I'm curious, have you had that conversation before? How did that play out for you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So if you think about a GXP process that is governed by laws and regulations, and so there are certain things you have to do. If you're doing any particular process in GMP, for example, there are certain elements that are dictated by law or regulation or guideline, and your process must meet those needs. But the way you operate and the way you meet those needs can be variable in that sense. So what you want to do is make sure that you understand and you map your process, what physically is, and right down to the manufacturing side, what is the operator doing physically to conduct this business activity, this process. And then your SOP should reflect that. Now, that then has to be, what they're doing has to be compliant with the laws and regulations. But it's if you do it in the opposite way and you write down, well, the law says you must do this, this, and this, and then you hand it to the operator and say, well, you have to do this because the SOP says so. That inherently it opens you up to compliance issues, because that might not be exactly the way they're doing it, even though the end result is a compliant product and process. So it's really, that's the way I think about it. You have to be, of course, compliant with the laws and regulations, but if you start from mapping the activity itself and then write that into the SOP, you find that you get a higher level of compliance.
I'm going to ask a really basic question, because it's come up in a few different conversations I've had with a few different clients. What is the role of SOPs? And that sounds like such a fundamental, basic question. But the reason I'm asking the question is I've had clients who look at SOPs as essentially what I need to show the FDA. That's one perspective. That's pretty much the entire thinking around it. A lot of that thought process I've seen primarily in like the pharmacy world, but they literally go buy SOPs, keep it within like the plastic wrapping, and when the FDA comes, they go and then rip it open and just show it. It does not reflect reality at all. So that's one perspective. Another perspective is this is the universe we work within. It's adapted for our use, but it's a 10,000-foot view of what we actually do. And we're going to have work instructions that take that next level, if you will, and tell you operationally what you should be doing. And then there's the third perspective, which is SOPs are the only document we look at, and it's going to be comprehensive, it's going to be operational, and it's also going to give you that 10,000-foot view. We're going to have it in 3 different formats. So you're going to have the written the 10,000-foot view of what we're trying to achieve, the operational perspective, and maybe like a diagram with attachments. In your opinion, what's the right way and why?
So, I mean, my own opinion is to really utilize that quality triangle with the policies at the top, SOPs, work instructions, and associated forms and documents, and to maximize that, the purpose of each. So, your policy sets out your high-level principles, if you like, on a given topic. Your SOPs then, to me, should be lean, because the details should be held in the work instructions. That's the way I've always operated, and the way we operate, at Syros, because your SOP then should be clear and simple enough that someone else coming in fresh to the organization, to the team, is able to follow it and achieve the same result. So the way it's written is critically important, and the simplicity of it and the scope of it should be appropriate for what you're trying to achieve. But it doesn't. It really gives you that framework of what is required, and so this step is required, this step is required to be approved, and so on and so forth. The details of that can be captured elsewhere, and there's a few reasons for that. One, it simplifies your SOP and makes it easy for anybody to understand. And people, because we work in a cross-functional matrix, multiple functions might be involved in the same process and same SOP. And so they might be involved in step 1, somebody else is involved in step 2, and somebody else in step 3. So they need to know the detail of their particular step so they can be compliant. But that can be captured later on in work instructions that apply to that particular operation. So they don't need to have all of that bogged down in the details in the SOP. The other element is consistency and updating. So it's a huge effort within organizations to update and maintain the quality management system. And if your SOPs are too detailed, a small change in what's happening at the work instruction level, what should be the work instruction level, can have a massive impact in the updating for no real good reason other than you made your SOP too detailed. So you can update your work instruction without affecting the actual process, the SOP itself, and remain compliant. And so I've seen many companies get bogged down in the SOP update cycle just because of that very reason. They were too bulky.
Very, very cool. Actually, we usually aim for about 15, 20 minutes. We're already at the 25-minute mark, so I appreciate your patience with me. Couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
First question. What is a question you'd like to ask the audience based on what we just talked about?
So I guess I'm interested to know people's perspective on operational excellence. Have they been involved in it? Have they applied it? And what do they like and what do they not like about it?
Love it. So what is your perspective on operational excellence? I will admit that in my experience, I've mostly seen horror stories around operational excellence. I've seen companies try it, and they've struggled. I think one of the advantages you bring to the table is you've seen it across so many different places, and I've seen the mistakes being made. So it sounds like you guys have a better chance of success than most. But I've seen more horror stories than not. Has that been your experience, or has that been different from what you've seen?
I think I guess a horror story would probably be a lack of operational excellence.
I guess I meant is the first part of a larger evolution.
Yes.
So if you compare it to the final version, you're kind of going, we were really starting from very little. But that was what I meant. But yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you have to start somewhere, and you have to just bite off pieces that you can chew. You really take it stepwise, and you'll make incremental improvements, which is the whole Kaizen concept in itself. So I think you definitely have to make a start, but you have to also be clear about what you want to achieve, and have everybody bought into that. Because the lack of buy-in and inability to communicate effectively and bring people along the change curve is going to be the number one stumbling block for implementing operational excellence.
Agree 100%. The two questions I usually ask, what was the most memorable part of this month for you?
Most memorable part of this month, getting some sunshine. Finally, summer's around.
I agree.
We can get outside. We can, get some vitamin D. It's great.
We haven't had that, have we? It's just been cold, so I'm enjoying that as well. I'm 100% with you. And last question: what did you learn this week? This week includes last week, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. This week, I learned myself a lot about operational excellence. To be honest, it's been every day is a school day. I think there's always something you can learn. So the more you dig into these things, the more you see examples of what's good, bad, and ugly, and try and learn from those. So, yeah.
What was one technique that stood out for you out of those?
I think it's really the importance of the culture and instilling operational excellence into culture. Yeah. So I know that when these things first came out, the idea of operational excellence came out. It was very heavy on systems and tools, and people were focused on, well, we need a system for this, we need a tool for that, without having the culture itself to underpin, the principles of applying operational excellence into the organization.
That's awesome. I'm going to do a quick summary. We landed up talking about operational excellence. You briefly discussed the value of synergy and the value of teams and the sort of role of operational excellence as it ties into scale and building the building blocks, if you will, for scale and for larger community building, so that the company grows together. We've all seen experienced companies that didn't have that piece together, and it's come back to bite them after the fact. You then talked a little bit about how this is impacting how you're already seeing some positive impacts in the clinical development space. And you spoke about how this becomes more and more important as you start getting into the 100, 200 people range, if that's true. You spoke about the GXP processes and how this becomes extremely important in GXP. But what you're fundamentally answering is what will we develop and when, and how will those decisions be made? We spoke about the difference between scale and control between your different titles and how that all comes together, and the fact that you have to land up balancing all of it. We spoke about Dr. Shingo. We talked about Carl Spetzler and decision quality, which I really want to get into the next time we have you on. And then we had a discussion around SOPs and their role, SOPs versus work instructions, and how legal versus regulatory see it. And it's not that they're contradictory at all. They're really complementary, if anything. So I thought that was fascinating as well. And the key piece being in operational excellence, the value of managing teams of teams and what that means, and going across a cross-functional matrix. Did I miss anything?
No, that's it. Spot on.
Perfect. This was wonderful. How can people reach you if they have questions?
You can reach me. I'm on LinkedIn, or you can reach me at apreston@syros.com.
Perfect. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me at Darshan Talks on Twitter or on our website at darshantalks.com. Ashley, this was wonderful having you on. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure as always. Thank you.